and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Millennial Round Table today, and if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Around the table, we have, first of all, Dr. Nick Pitts, Director for Cultural Engagement for the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture. And getting used to calling you Dr. Pitts now.
No, I wouldn't get used to that. Just feel free to call me Pitts. That's what all my fraternity brothers call me, right? And so this is kind of like a fraternity here, right?
I guess so. We'll still call you Nick. I also want to introduce to individuals around the round table and our studio audience as well, an individual I've known for a number of years. She actually was one of my students, Nick, so we'll see how that works out.
Hey.
Aszia Pearson, Discipleship and Outreach Director for pureHOPE. And many of you might remember when we've had a number of people like Noel Boucher on the program talking about this. And Aszia, it's just great to have you in studio with us today.
Yeah, and I'm actually getting used to my name as well. I just got married, so Pearson is...
I knew you as a Walker. Now she's a Pearson. Went from Walker to Pearson, so just got married. But I got it right. The other day,
Yes.
your boss introduced you as Aszia Walker, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
In front of your husband.
Yes, he did. And he married us, too, so...
You know, Nick, you just did a wedding. Those are the kind of mistakes you just not want to make. You just do not want to make, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's a couple of things in a wedding that you just can't mess up, and names are one of those things, unfortunately.
That's so good. Let's, if we can, for just a minute, Aszia, talk about pureHOPE. This is an organization I was aware of even when it was back in Cincinnati, interviewing Jerry Kirk and others, even in my home and on this program and a number of other places. And this is just an outstanding ministry, and one that fits very well with the next issue of Outlook. You've got the Outlook issue that just came out. Nick Pitts and I wrote an article each in that one, but the next one is on pornography. And so that's one of many things you talk about there at pureHOPE, isn't it?
Yeah, so at pureHOPE, our vision is a world free of sexual exploitation and brokenness, which is a very big, bold, but also a very sure vision, because we know that Christ has said he will establish justice in the whole earth. We know that that form of exploitation will be eradicated in his return. And so our goal is to work toward that vision and that ultimate end by pursuing Christian solutions in a sexualized culture. And that's what we want to provide through resources, through in-person speaking, ministry, and events. So addressing issues like pornography, not just saying, hey, this is wrong, but actually helping people who have struggled with pornography, have been harmed by other people's struggle with pornography, and not just that issue, but any form of sexual exploitation, any form of sexual brokenness, and looking at what does the word have to say? How can we understand our own brokenness better, and how can we move toward a place of healing? And so that's basically what we're doing. The event that you just mentioned that Noel messed up my name at, we were in Dallas connecting a big group of churches and getting together with parents, equipping them as to how they can raise their kids in this digital age that seems so scary and so intimidating, but really recognizing that we do have answers, and they're really good ones.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what great work that you all are doing, just because the problem is just so pervasive in our culture today. I think statistics I've been reading, 80 to 90% of teens have been exposed to pornography. And it's almost like that silent, besettling sin that just there's a stigma to it that keeps people from really trying to bring light into it. And when you stay in the dark, it's just so empowering. And so I think about it just because I'm reminded of Oswald Chambers. And so Oswald Chambers, you just have my utmost for his highest. And I love his definition of sin, because he says sin is a legitimate desire taken to an illegitimate place. And especially when you have so many young people that are delaying getting married, there's those legitimate desires for longing, for connection, for intimacy, but it's taken to an illegitimate place with pornography. And it's wreaking havoc on so many areas, and we don't even know the unintended consequences. But one of those unintended consequences of what we're seeing is the pornography is building a bridge to this sex trafficking, that you want to move it out of virtual reality and come into reality, which is feeding into, I think last statistic I saw is 46 million people in the world today are enslaved, and 27 million are sexually trafficked right now. It's just the pervasiveness of the problem. So the need for what you all are doing is just phenomenal.
And I think that's one of the things that Noah Boucher was really kind of addressing as well. And that is because he was really concerned about sexual trafficking, but he recognized that maybe we need to go upstream and recognize the need that is creating this particular set of circumstances. So you're going to have your interns coming in very soon. And so there are individuals that are working at all sorts of different levels within Pure Hope. Talk about that if you might.
Yeah, so just as Nick was saying, pornography definitely can create a demand for sex trafficking. Pornography is also linked to sex trafficking through sex trafficking being used, sex trafficking victims being used in pornography. And kind of the third big thing that people miss is pornography actually is by definition sex trafficking. And we don't want to face that when so many of us are struggling with it to one degree or another. But if you look at the definition of sex trafficking, the recruitment, harboring, transportation, and obtaining of a person for the purpose of commercial sex, that's the day in, day out business of a porn producer. And so those are the types of things we talk about, just the connections of different injustices, different types of sexual exploitation, but then more importantly, the connections between, answers and what Christ tells us in terms of abstaining from sexual immorality by saying he wants us to know how to possess our bodies. If he says he wants us to know how, it implies that he longs to teach us. We have a really good Father. And so that's what we talk about at Pure Hope is the story of sex. And that's what we're taking our interns through this summer. And like you said, what we want to do is create an opportunity for people of all demographics, all passions, all skill sets, all interests, because we recognize that this is an all hands on deck issue. So we want to equip future stay-at-home moms and stay-at-home dads, future accountants, future engineers, people who you wouldn't typically think have a big piece of the pie or hand in the fight when it comes to countering sex trafficking. But we recognize that this really is affecting all of us. And so we'll be bringing our interns in to basically equip them on what actually is God's story. What does he want us to do about these issues, and starting in our own personal lives and how we can impact our sphere of influence before we're looking out, trying to change the world, which, speaking of Millennial Round Table, that's something we tend to think that we can carry the world on our backs and we can be the one to fix it all. But there's a quote we talk about all the time by Leo Tolstoy where it talks about everyone thinks of changing the world. No one thinks of changing himself. And so that's kind of what we take our interns through is how can we sanctify ourselves that others may be sanctified.
Yeah, because it really is like a justice issue when, like, at the heart of it. So Victor Boutros and Gary Hagen with the locus effect, they speak to this, and it's this longing to bring about justice, because we know justice is at the very heart of God. You look at, I think it's Psalm 87, and so justice and righteousness make up his throne in heaven. We see Martin Luther King that just really just lifted and highlighted this, that justice would roll down like mighty rivers, and from Amos 5:24. It's this sense that we want to bring about justice because at the end of the day, what Jesus has taught us to pray is that his kingdom would come, his will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. And in heaven, there's perfect justice. And so the onus on the Christian then is to bring about justice. And one of the ways that you do that is through not just the eradication of poverty, but the presence of shalom. And so
let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about a few other issues. One is a film that's coming out here the last couple of days because we had Gordon Robertson in here. We've been promoting the film that will happen next Tuesday in the theaters, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, something put together by CBN. And every time there's an event like that, of course, when we had Franklin Graham in here, we talked about his Facing the Darkness. We want to talk about a film coming out, A Heart of a Man, in just a minute. But if you would like some more information, Aszia talked about the story of sex. That is what we have linked to her picture on the website, pointofview.net. You can read that. It gives you a little more understanding of what is being done at Pure Hope, and we certainly encourage you to find out more and to support that ministry. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Joel Rosenberg was on my radio program recently to talk about his new novel, The First Hostage. We didn't spend too much time talking about his book, but instead focused on the phenomenon of apocalyptic Islam. Let me explain what that is. There is both radical Islam as well as apocalyptic Islam. The vast majority of Muslims do not fit into either category. According to some reliable polls, only about 10% of the 1.6 billion Muslims subscribe to the concept of violent jihad. Millions and millions of Muslims may believe in Islamic eschatology and even believe that we're entering into the end time, but that doesn't mean that they believe in violence as a way to achieve it. Radical Muslim groups like Al-Qaeda, Hamas, the Taliban, and the Muslim Brotherhood may use violence against Jews and Christians. They want to push them off of Muslim lands. But they differ from apocalyptic Islam. Joel Rosenberg puts it this way: radical Islam seeks to attack us. Apocalyptic Islam seeks to annihilate us. Apocalyptic Muslim groups would include the leaders of ISIS, now called the Islamic State, and the top leaders in Iran. They're driven by Muslim prophecies that you can find in the Quran and the Hadith. They believe that the end of days is at hand, and they believe that their Islamic Messiah will come to establish an Islamic kingdom known as a caliphate. And they also believe that the Messiah will implement Sharia law throughout the globe and force everyone to submit to this caliphate. Joel Rosenberg has found that few world leaders understand these issues. Sadly, they do not understand the danger of apocalyptic genocidal Islam. We should pray that they understand this because the future of America and the future of the Western world depends on it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. In select theaters one night only, Tuesday, May 23rd. Information at inourhands1967.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about a lot of very important issues today related to millennials. And one of those, of course, we've just been talking about in terms of pornography. I want to get to the film in just a minute, but it occurred to me when you talked about millennials, this has changed everything. My generation, I'm old enough to be your parents, so I understand that there is a generational gap in that sense, although I'm digitally involved. But if you were to talk to somebody of my peer group, they would say the first time I saw pornography, the most obvious answer was, went over to a neighbor's house and they found one of Dad's magazines, and for the first time I saw that. And sometimes that would be in your teen years. Now, if you ask any millennial, when's the first time you saw a digital image, or you saw an image, it was a digital image, and it was maybe at 4 or 5. So you now have, in a sense, a sociological experiment going on, Aszia, where you have a whole generation that has perceived pornography even before they had maybe the mental and moral capacity to understand what was going on. True?
Yes, that is true. We're seeing younger and younger ages being exposed to more and more hardcore content than we've ever seen before. But something that is incredibly encouraging to me as I think about all ages is we have the better story, God's story of sex, which he tells very candidly and very frequently from Genesis to Revelation. He tells that through single and married male and female image bearers. We have the better story. And something that I love is it's Joshua 8:35 is just the most permission-giving verse for mentors, parents, anyone who interacts with, as Kerby was just saying, these young kids who are being exposed, or older generations, any generation. Joshua 8:35 is when the people of Israel are coming into the promised land. The Hebrew nation is coming into the promised land. And it says that Joshua read the entirety of God's commands with the women and the little ones and the strangers present. And that's important because if you read the entirety of God's commands, he is talking about rape, molestation. He is talking about defilement. He is talking about self-serving sexuality versus giving and beautiful and holy. Sexual stewardship, he's talking about all of this, and he is saying that it is a-okay to share that with your children from his perspective and let them ask their questions, their age-appropriate questions. And so every generation, the Lord is not shy about having these better, truthful conversations rather than just succumbing to the lies that the world is telling us.
Yeah, hashtag real talk, right? So millennials, we're all about real talk, having authentic conversation. And so one of the things I always call it, it's not real talk, it's Kanye talk.
Yeah,
I like because Kanye, no one has ever thought to themselves, I wonder what Kanye's thinking right now, because he always tells you what he's thinking. But nevertheless, but that's the truth of God, right? So like we don't have to wonder about what God thinks on a particular subject, because he's what's good for us has been written down in His Word, and we know His Word points to Jesus, and we know that from His Word points to Jesus from John 5. We know Jesus has come for the fullness of our life and the completion of our joy from John 10 and John 12. And so what we continue to see is that pornography is just it's a fruit off an illegitimate tree that's just rotten. And so we don't need to be eating that fruit. I love what Pope John Paul II says. He says pornography is not a problem because it shows us too much. It's because it shows us too little. That there's just so much more that we just become we become satisfied in that moment when there's so much more that yet is to be seen. So
well said. Let's, if we can, real quickly talk about the movie that is coming out, Heart of a Man. I've seen some of the trailer for it, and we've talked about this with Noel Boucher, but I really wanted people to understand that there's just a great opportunity for them to really take some of these ideas and understand how that fits into their own life.
Yes, so Heart of Man it's going to be very familiar to some in the sense that it's the prodigal story. But what's unique about it is it's a deconstructed retelling of that narrative that really shows what sexual stewardship is all about, but it shows it from the perspective of God's heart of love, very ferocious, faster than you can run away from Him love. And so it's an overlaid docudrama. It's beautiful cinematic experience, but it's overlaid on these great interviews of men and women sharing their stories. And the whole point of the film is to just draw you in deeper to what God's heart really is. And one of the taglines is, what if our shame isn't a barrier, but it's a bridge? And I think any of us can see that in our own testimony, our own story, whatever the struggle has been or currently is. Ultimately, when we come forward, we see, as it says in 1 John 1:9, that He is just to forgive. His justice toward us in Christ is His forgiveness. And so that's just a beautiful story that this tells in a way that eliminates the Christian cheese factor that I know has been a common complaint among our generation with films. It's actually a really beautiful, well-done story. It's cinematically excellent, good color, good music, all of these things. And so that has a one-night-only release with Fathom Events of September 14th, which sounds far away, but I've already bought 10 tickets for me and my friends because I know they're going to sell out.
it's Michelle Pitts' birthday.
Yep.
I hear you, Mom.
Yes. So be sure to, check that out if this is something that you feel it has impacted your life in some way.
I'm trusting you, Aszia, because I am one of those guys. Hopefully nobody throws stones at me right now, but I'm always very skeptical of Christian movies because often it sacrifices quality for the sake of message.
Yes.
And so, but if I can sense that I can trust you already, and so there's just a goodness to come because we recognize the truth that God has called us to do all things with excellence and for His glory. And so, if we can bring message and quality, I'm all for it. So, Mom, know that tickets are in the mail for you to Clarksville, Tennessee.
And we need to send him a trailer, don't we? And maybe
Absolutely,
our listeners.
yes.
And as we get a little closer, we're going to promote it just like we have some of the others. We've had, of course, a number of individuals in studio when we have those one-night events that Fathom puts together. Of course, you had Facing the Darkness, and we had, of course, Franklin Graham sitting in that chair. Yeah. And then recently we just had Gordon Robertson in here talking about In Our Hands. And so those are ones that we've already promoted and are continuing to promote since that one is taking place next week. This one in September, as we get a little closer, we've had the producer in here before, the director, I guess.
Jason Paymer.
Yeah, so we've had him in here. And so we'll just see if we can convince Nick that he really needs to go. So I think he'll be impressed.
Yeah, I know I will be. I know. So this is the reality of my mind. When I go see a movie, I haven't seen a movie in maybe No, I haven't seen a movie in a long time. And
That's what the PhD project is, right? And when you're getting your PhD, you don't have time for movies.
So, like, I judge the goodness of a movie is if I look at my cell phone during the movie. I don't know if anybody else is like that. So if a movie's good, if a movie's good, I won't look at my cell phone. But my friends know as soon as I look at my cell phone, I'm like, I'm checked out. I'm done.
checked out.
2 thumbs down from Nick.
Because the average millennial will look at their phone 150 times every day. And so if a movie's bad, I'll get all 150 times in the movie.
The film.
Just before we take a break and when we come back, I want to talk about adulting. And that is something I wrote about back in March. And then, interesting enough, John Stonestreet just wrote about it. I don't know if you borrow from him. I know I borrow from him sometimes. So we'll see how that all comes about. But just before we do, as people go to Pure Hope, talk about what those resources might be. pureHOPE.net. And they can certainly get not only this story of sex, but you have a good curriculum that could be used in the churches and in small groups. And so that's available. If they want to already get their tickets for the Heart of Man, they can do that as well. So talk about what's available on your website.
Yes, so one key resource we would point everyone toward is Quest, Parenting in a Sexualized Culture, and that's basically going to take people through the story of sex, how to create open, ongoing dialogue with children, how to address tech challenges, and how to leave a godly legacy in your home. I recently married as a single, found that this impacted me. As a married woman with no kids, this has impacted me in a huge way. Anyone who has any kind of breath in their body, which is all of us, this resource is going to be impactful. And definitely if you're a parent or a mentor or a teacher and work with youth, this is a key resource for you. And then also our magazine, A World Free.
Magazine, yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yes, we in our artistic and a compelling way, we'll talk about some key issues of our day and just show that this isn't new. God's not surprised. He's not scared. And again, we do have good answers as we seek to grow in our understanding and our prayerful intimacy with him. And so that's just kind of a beautiful, compelling way to engage some of these issues that can seem really big and scary.
And I might just mention that magazine is such a great coffee table magazine. I know doctors and dentists and others will put them in there with the other magazines. You also have material about how will your kids navigate this sexualized culture, tired of objectification in media and on the campus. So a lot of great material.
I couldn't agree more. And I love how you're continually framing this. It's not so much just eradicating a practice of looking at pornography, but putting something in its place, right? Is it Spurgeon that said the heart is a idol-making factory? And so it's not just taking something away, but it's actually putting something there. Very much what Paul was instructing the church at Philippi to think about such things. Think about that which is noble, which is pure, which is good, which is right.
4:8,
yeah, so you're wanting to think about and replace those things, not simply just remove those things. And to be able to place it with something that's beautiful, that's true, that's right, really doesn't give pornography that space that it once abided in, which I think is just pivotal, huge, and a beautiful thing.
Well, let's take a break. And again, you can find that at purehope.net. We're going to talk about adulting. And the first article there is from our good friend John Stonestreet at Breakpoint. Adult is not a verb. We'll talk about what this means and how that relates to millennials right after these important messages.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, Millennial Round Table. I want to get into this issue of adulting, and back in March I wrote about that because there was a library offering a 6-part course called Adulting 101. We've also posted a piece by John Stonestreet, Breakpoint, Adult is Not a Verb, and around the round table, Nick Pitts and Aszia Pearson. And I thought this would be good. Aszia, let me come to you for just a minute since you're the newer person around the round table. This whole idea of adulting, it isn't a verb, but now it's the idea that, well, we just need to give some basic tasks to the millennial generation. We need to help them figure out finances, how to get a job, how to cook, how to deal with interpersonal relationships. And there are some of our older listeners are going, you have got to be kidding me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So adulting is a reference term used to describe things like changing a light bulb or changing a fire alarm, things like this. And I'm all for funny memes and using words to poke a little fun at yourself. I think that's enjoyable. So I just, in case any of my friends are listening, if you text me and say # however, and really is a problem where we can't do our own laundry or write our own resumes or things like this, that is a problem. And something that as I was reading the article that you sent out to us and that you shared, the whole time I'm thinking, okay, this is embarrassing, but also it's a show that we do need exactly what the Lord calls us to in his word. We do need older men teaching younger men,
Yes.
older women teaching younger women. And it is a laughable problem and it's an embarrassing problem. It's also not true of every millennial.
That's true.
But
I do my laundry, y'all.
yeah,
And you guys are the exceptions to the rule. We understand that. Just by definition, you are. But go
yes.
ahead.
So it's definitely not true of everyone, but where it is true, it is tempting to laugh or to be embarrassed or to condescend. But I think what we really need is the older men and women. I'm looking at you listeners who are the most frustrated by this. That's your golden opportunity to find someone who can't even fold their own clothes and say, okay, let's quit laughing about it and let's
Do something about
show
it.
you how to do this.
Yeah.
Okay, so is folding clothes included in laundry? Because if that's the case, then I need to rescind my previous statement.
Yeah.
I'm just watching his eyes as you were talking.
Oh no, folding's not necessarily my greatest strong suit. When I was a Boy Scout, that was for one session. I was a Boy Scout because of paper airplanes and folding, but nevertheless, but it's so true. This is our world that we live today. That which used to be required is now optional and is to be celebrated, when in reality, my grandparents, if I were to send them a picture of me paying my bills and saying adulting, they would say, what are you talking about?
Of
You're
course.
a grown man. You need to pay your bills. Or if I were going to the grocery store, which every once in a while I still do, I live off protein bars, I feel like, because I know I can eat pretty quickly with them. I'm adulting right now. Well, that's just a reality of the matter. But that's just kind of, and Ben Sass has got a new book out that I'm really anxious to read that kind of touches on what Christian Smith has been doing his research on, this perpetual adolescence,
Right.
extended adolescence, where we're increasingly, it's not just helicopter parents that are enabling this type of behavior, but it's just kind of negligent children that still are kind of what the characterization is that grown children that can shave right now. And so it's just very unfortunate because, one, there's a sense that, yes, these individuals need to grow up, but two, it's the sense that, yes, parents need to stop treating them like children, because inevitably you act the way that you're treated. And so there's two hands to be able to play in this. And it is funny, though, but the reality of the matter is what Shakespeare said to be true. Jesters do oft prove as prophets. So we're laughing about it, but the reality of the matter is that we're laughing because it's so true today.
And there's a difference between laughing and celebrating. And so I think as long as it's a joke, I think it's okay to laugh and say, oh, that's, funny that we're this age and just now learning to do that. But if there's progress being made, okay, fine, I'm willing to give a chuckle. But when there's no progress being made, there's no progress intended upon, and we're celebrating this prolonged adolescence, this arrested development, this Peter Pan syndrome, call it when you want to call it, that's that's where we're seeing the problem, is that it's become less of a laugh and more of a celebration of, haha, look at us, we don't have to grow up, everyone does everything. That's where we've got the problem.
And it just trickles out. So it's never just, we can laugh about it because it's laundry, but then for individuals that are working in the workplace right now, we know that laundry, not doing the laundry, trickles and affects their work ethic because it lends itself to a type of entitlement. It lends itself to a lackadaisical attitude when it comes in maybe office hours, or maybe it's the little things around the office that really do lend to the culture. And what Harvard Business Review continues to point out is that culture is very significant in the workplace and can inhibit productivity and the creation of efficiencies within the workplace. And so, yeah, we can laugh about it because it's isolated to the home, but in reality, it trickles into everything from increasing debt, waste to the workplace to, man, I wish they would just put their weights up in the gym. Come on, put your weights up in the... No, I'm just kidding. I don't go to the gym. Who are we talking to?
Well, some of these courses, bare essential cooking, talking about how you can maybe make quesadillas using a towel, aluminum foil, and an iron, or financial know-how, moving out, inside the lines adult coloring club. I mean, again, we roll our eyes, but these are actual courses that I wrote about back in March. And then, of course, now the one that is out from yesterday, Breakpoint, John Stone Street's writing about some of these others.
I mean, we're seeing just a dramatic shift. Millennials and again, I know this is the temptation for every generation to say this, that we're new and unique, but there very much is where there's not a reliance upon the intermediary institutions that typically have brought about what the Bible would say is sanctification, what we would say is just mature, or what society would say is maturity. And what's happening is you just see 33% of millennials are living at home right now. It's the largest. That's a 7% jump from the previous generation. You've got a group of 51% of millennials that are underemployed right now. You've got a group of millennials right now that only 4%, I think it's 4%, have read more than 5 books this year. And so there's just this sense that there's a different way of doing life right now. And how do we as a society begin to respond to that, which I think is just going to be increasingly interesting.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in response to that, I think part of it, and this is a place where I've been frustrated often with the Lord, where I feel like the Lord is perpetually reminding me, if you see it, it's your job. I think Moses is a good example of this. You see him getting frustrated with the people that he's leading, but then ultimately crying out for mercy on their behalf. And so as I think about who's, listening to this show and people who probably see this and agree that this is ridiculous, that would be my encouragement to any of us who see, hey, this is a problem. Hey, if you see it, that's where you can step in, and that's where you can have compassion for those who maybe weren't raised with parents at all, or a 2-parent household, or parents who taught them how to do some of these very basic things, to have compassion there. And then people who had everything, taught to them and given to them, and every opportunity, reprove where reproof is necessary. I think those are kind of our 2 responses, is reprove and redirect, or have compassion and lend help. And I think those of us who see these problems, for us with our peers, or for maybe some older listeners with those in your community who are lazy, entitled, fitting the stereotype however you see it, that's really a place and an opportunity for us to step in.
As the great 90s hip-hop artist Vanilla Ice said, yo, if you got a problem, I'll solve it. Check out the hook while my DJ. No, I'm just kidding. But again, if we completely agree with what Aszia was saying, but if we use Moses as example, if we use that kind of figure, what you see is that the problems became very abundant. And so what happened when the problems became abundant and the responsibilities became much? You had his father-in-law, Jethro, that came in, and Jethro was able to delegate out some of that. Right. And I think that's where the beauty of the church, as well as community organizations, is. There are increasingly a lot of problems in our society today. That's not unique to us. But what is unique is that our moving away from the institutions that typically can bring about solutions to those problems. And so what does that look like for you? Figure out what your passion is towards that problem to bring a solution, and join those organizations that can really bring a change. If it's trash on the side of the road, think about the Kiwanis Club that's adopted a highway. If it's discipleship, think about doubling down on your membership at a church. If it's civic opportunities and organizations, altruistic efforts, think about the United Way. there's so many organizations and institutions that really can bring about that change, and not just bring about the change, but see lasting change through it, which would be important.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, let's take some of your phone calls. What do you suggest? Nick gave us kind of a short list there, and we'll talk about a little bit more. What could the church do? What could we maybe even do in the public schools? Now, it used to be that you had a home ec course, and you wouldn't have to take bare essential cooking later on. And what about these intermediate organizations? We've had Nebraska Senator Ben Sass on the program in the past. We'll have him on again. We've had James Davidson Hunter on in the past. Maybe we could have him on again to talk about some of this. But I'd love to hear your comments. What should we do? Do we need courses on Adulting 101? And most importantly, what can the church, what can these other organizations do? Give us a call, 1-800-351-1212.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. On the 2017 National Day of Prayer, President Trump took a remarkable step in support of religious liberty. President Trump assembled religious leaders from a variety of faith traditions in the Rose Garden of the White House. In addition to making remarks about the National Day of Prayer, the president signed an executive order strengthening religious liberty. The executive action prioritizes religious liberty within the Trump administration, encouraging the HHS secretary to consider rules alleviating the religious conscience of those impacted by Obamacare, while ordering the IRS to decline enforcement of the Johnson Amendment and directing the Attorney General to issue guidance to all executive agencies on the law governing religious liberty. This executive order is one of the ways in which the president is fulfilling his constitutional obligation to ensure that the laws passed by the legislature be faithfully executed. Moreover, the executive order reins in those administrative agencies that have, in recent years, often ignored the laws governing religious liberty. As my boss, Kelly Shackelford, said after the president signed the order, our country was founded on the promise that its government would respect the religious liberty of its people. America's commitment to freedom, and especially religious freedom, should be our national priority. Much work remains in defense of religious liberty, but with this order, the president has set his administration on good footing. To learn how First Liberty is protecting the religious liberty of all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Millennial Round Table, if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Nick Pitts, Aszia Pearson here. And Aszia, you were the one talking about the church. First of all, we can certainly recognize that in Titus 2, it talks about older men discipling younger men, older women discipling younger women. And over the years, churches have been pretty good with the women's ministry. The men's ministry, not so much. Now, we had Promise Keepers a while back and some things like that. And so, again, we have people like Gene Getz and all sorts of other people on this program and Jim Cote and all these people talking about how to develop a men's ministry. But it seems to me that the first answer to this question is to say the whole millennial generation. I rarely run into a millennial that doesn't want to be mentored or discipled. Mm-hmm. Our big problem is get some of the older ones being willing to be the mentor or the discipler. So that's the first issue. The church itself has a responsibility, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the church in its organized function has a responsibility, and I am seeing some pickup there. But I also think what's so neat is, as the church, capital C, all of us as believers, we have individual responsibilities in our own sphere of influence. And that's something we talk about at Pure Hope a lot, is the idea of missional parenting, which is recognizing if you're doing these things well in your own home with your own kids, they've probably got at least 5 friends of theirs who qualify, at least biblically, as orphans, which means absent father or mother, or intimidating father or mother figure, whatever that is.
Right.
And so these are people in your midst, in your neighborhood, who you can be inviting into your space and teaching them some of these things, and just stepping into that authority and stepping into that mandate. And so I do think the church needs to do a better job of organizationally doing this, but I also think any of us can think of someone in our own midst who we can reach out to. And
well said.
Yeah, that's like what Jesus offered us, right? The discipleship is that we're teaching, but we're also teaching them to observe. And and we know that Jesus wasn't just a guy that lived at the church, but rather was the church, and he went out in order that he might show individuals how the righteous might live by faith. And so discipleship is really, what does it look like for the Christian parent to parent? What does that look like in the household? Increasingly, because millennials like myself, like, we grew up in broken homes, so we don't know what it looks like. We don't know what does it look like for a Christian mother and father to parent their child.
That's true.
What does it look like to go to the grocery store with kids? I don't know what it looks like to go to the grocery store, much like, so help me. I know how to get to the protein section, and I know how to get to the Coke. And that's about, and toothbrush and toothpaste stuff. And so that's about the extent. Or what does it look like when you go out to a restaurant? What does it look like? I mean, there's just so many facets of life that there's just a distinctive Christ-likeness that you bring into it. That Jesus would say was being the light in that place, that Paul would say was being the fragrant aroma of Christ in that place. And so there has to be a distinctiveness, or what you would say in business, what are the best practices to be able to do this? And I think that would be very helpful.
Let me take a phone call, because we're also talking about what we could do in the schools, and I think I have a home ec teacher here, so I wanted to hear from her. Annette in New Mexico. Annette, thank you for calling us today.
You bet.
What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, I am a home ec teacher, and nowadays it's called Family and Consumer Science. And I have been trying to push to get these kids to adult. And it is very difficult, being that their home lives are so mixed up and almost destroyed. A lot of my kids have the one-parent home, and some of them are foster parents, some of them are no parents, some of them are, just all mixed up. And I think the family home life, and just trying to get these kids to have role models in the church, they don't go to church, and that's another big issue. But what I do in my class is I try to get them to learn these things, learn how to fold laundry, learn how to make a basic meal. We made grilled cheese not long ago, and that's something you would think, oh, anybody knows how to grill cheese. And you mentioned earlier with an iron and a towel, but which can be done. But I think one of the solutions is we need to work on the family. We need to work on kids in the school, and we need to integrate these home ec classes back into the curriculum, because we're so busy looking at testing and academics, that we're forgetting that this is a whole person. It's not just a child who needs testing. We need to look at them as a whole person, and realize that this is what we need to work on, the child as a whole, including going to church and getting the part of Christ back into their lives, which is what they need, especially when they're going through hardships. That's when the time that they need Christ most, and they don't.
What about maybe how you feel about this? It seems to me that because the family is breaking apart, you're not just the teacher, but you're the counselor, you're the discipler, you're the mentor, you're the mother, you're the father, you're the aunt, you're the uncle, you're the grandmother. It seems like you have to do more and more because the family is falling apart.
Exactly. And right now, as a teacher, I do, and I have 4 kids of my own. We had some of my friends right now, they're like, well, my child is back and they're living. And it's just like, okay, well, now what? I have to pay for them and I have to support my grandchild now. And so they're thrown into that situation where they are supporting their grandchild now, and they're raising those grandchildren, whereas that's not the way it should be. And, right now, like I said, my kids are all grown up. They're all on their own. 3 are in college, actually, I should say 2 graduated from college, and 1 is still in college, and the last one is in the Army. And so they know how to adult. They know how to pay their bills. But they had 2 parents. Mm-hmm. They had 2 parents that took them to church. They had 2 parents that brought them up in the church and had that multi-generational tasking that you guys had talked about earlier.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you calling in. And again, it seems as we go around the round table, we've only got about a minute before we take the break again. This is an opportunity for the church, don't you think, to step in and become the parent that isn't there?
Such a unique opportunity for the church to be that thing, to be that entity that really helps to shape and to form the child. Because again, you think about Miss Annette's, the great work that she's doing, but many schools around the country, they just can't add another class to the mix. I think about Tennessee, for example. There's 24 credits that are available in Tennessee high schools that a student can take. 22 of them are already required. So there's very little flexibility for creativity right in there. But it's an opportunity for the church to really fill that need that's there, that the state just, one, whether it should or shouldn't, but 2, to be able to be that formative influence, especially for many of these children that just don't have that at the home.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue this for a little bit longer. If you'd like to join us as we are talking about everything from pornography to adulting and what that might mean, we'll certainly carry on that conversation and take some more phone calls. And President Trump said a few things this week, and some of his opponents have said some things, so we do have to cover that, don't we, Nick?
President Trump? Remind me? Oh, yes, that's our president. Right. It's been about 3 minutes since I heard his name.
Oh, so many things going on, so we'll be talking about that as well. The Millennial Round Table, and if you'd like to join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Also have a link to pureHOPE.net, and you can find all that on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
From CBN Documentaries comes a new film, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem.
Our goal is clear, to wipe Israel off the map.
For 6 days in 1967, surrounded by enemies on all sides, Israel stood alone, fighting for survival. In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, in select theaters for a one-night event, Tuesday, May 23rd only. Theater and ticket information is available at inourhands1967.com.
We go through seasons, getting our education, falling in love, marriage, children, challenges, success. Sometimes the checkbook is full, and sometimes it's not. And through all of that, Point of View is here, working for you, working with you to make a difference. Please consider whether this is the season for you to support Point of View, to join the Truth Team. Join today at pointofview.net/team or call for details 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Let's work together for good. Pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And if you're just joining us right now, I might just mention in the first hour we did talk about pornography and talked about the ministry of Pure Hope Ministries, and that is on the website. We also spent some time talking about adulting. As a matter of fact, one of the articles we posted came out yesterday in Breakpoint, and it is entitled "Adult is Not a Verb," or you can go back to one of my Viewpoint commentaries March 16th on adulting, and that's led to a variety of new phone calls. In studio with us, Nick Pitts as well as Aszia Pearson, and we'll give you a little more information about them as the hour unfolds. But let's go back and take some phone calls that we've been waiting for in Georgia on the Good News Network. Jonathan, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Kerby, how are you?
Very good. What would you like to say?
I just wanted to agree a little bit with your recent phone call from over in New Mexico, the home ec teacher.
Sure.
That they're having to set up these different classes in school. I'm only 20, and I went through a home ec class, but thankfully I had a mother who taught me a lot of those life skills, so that my wife doesn't have to teach me all those skills, and she's very thankful for that. But
sure,
I think that God set up the family the way He did for a reason, and part of those things in the family are for mother or father to teach children, basic life skills, that a school or government institution shouldn't have to teach a student or a child. And then when that family, the unit that God set up breaks down, and you don't have a mother or you don't have a father, or for whatever reason, the government, or hopefully the church is the next ideal, but the government's going to have to take up slack and throw that in there. So I think that's one of the major problems with our society, is the family has no value, and it's lost its importance, really.
Back to, for those of you just joining us, Nick talked about, let's take Tennessee, 24 units, and 22 are already spoken for. So it's probably not going to happen in the schools. And Aszia, let me come back to you, because it does seem to me that these are opportunities for the church and opportunities for family, because you talked about this idea of a missional family, that, okay, if you're doing it right in your family, you can have an influence in a lot of other families where the kids essentially are orphans. And so I want our listeners to see that you can be what we used to call the Kool-Aid mom, the mom on the block that everybody came to. It's the home everybody wanted to be in, because mom and dad were home and they were playing with the kids, and it was a place where there was safety and comfort. It's also a place where you could teach manners and hospitality and all sorts of things right there in your own home.
Exactly. So first off, just agreeing with your statement that family has broken down. If we look at the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, what we see is the enemy's attack on fatherhood, on husbandhood, and on unity, which aligns with each elemental being of the Trinity. And so that's old news. That's not new to us. There's just a pointed way that the enemy is attacking this generation, but we know there's nothing new under the sun. So these are things that, again, the Bible is still relevant and can still speak to. And so what it tells us as the church is, it says it is our job, the onus is on us, to visit orphans and widows. What is an orphan and a widow? It's, by definition, it's the husbandless and the fatherless specifically. So when we see that absence of parenting, or when we see that absence of aligning with a new family unit, that is where the church is called to be family. We're called brothers and sisters in Christ for a reason. We recognize Christ as our bridegroom, and we recognize the Lord as our Father. And so we get to emblematically represent that to those in our midst who maybe don't have that. And just as Kerby was saying, missional parenting being, or missional mentoring being a big part of that. I agree with your wife. I'm very grateful that my husband, who I just recently married, has a great deal of life skills in his repertoire, and I appreciate that immensely. But I do know that there are so many men in our generation and so many women in our generation who aren't getting taught that. And so, as I was saying before, it really is, the onus is on us as the church. Where we see someone who is lacking in that, that's where we can go bring those skills.
Yeah, it very much is just doing what the Bible has always told us to do, which is be hospitable, to opening up our homes, and without even knowing it, we may be entertaining angels in the moments. And so I was drawn to a particular article out of the Daily Briefing this morning about the marriageable men, and how our culture very much is shifting, because there used to be a day that love and marriage goes together like the horse and carriage from Frank Sinatra. But
now
increasingly,
we don't have horses and carriages.
Yeah,
so
unfortunately, we just don't have that anymore.
Love and marriage too.
And so what we're now seeing is that there's just an increase in the number of children that are being born that are outside of what we would consider the nuclear family. And so that number right now is at 40% of children that are coming into from in the U.S. specifically that are going into it from an unmarried woman's perspective. Whereas just even in 2000, that number was 28%. And so it's increased by 12% over just these past 17 years. But what the research continues to indicate is that when there is a man and a woman in a household, that exponentially is better for the child. Bradley Wilcox at the University of Virginia has done a lot of research on this, and he says that when the children are raised in that type of household, that what we see is they're more likely to attend college, are physically and emotionally healthier, are less likely to be physically or sexually abused, less likely to use drugs or alcohol or commit delinquent behaviors, have a decreased risk of divorcing when they get married, are less likely to become pregnant or impregnate someone as a teenager, and are less likely to be raised in poverty. So what we're seeing is that the social science research backs up the biblical principles.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that book too, The Case for Marriage by White and the very good resources. And you mentioned something, Aszia, about life skills. When we've had Dr. Richard Swenson on this program, he's estimated that the average child from birth to 18 has to learn 20,000 different devices. They can be as simple as how to use a knife, how to use a pencil. They could be as complex as how to program a DVR, how to drive a car, how to use a microwave. And you think about all the gaps that exist because they don't have parents or that actually are there, or parents who don't know what to do with all these new devices. And so as a result, we're really not passing on from one generation to the next some of those really valuable skills. Try to find somebody that knows how to knit, do tatting, things like that. I mean, we're losing all sorts of skills as well.
If electric can openers all of a sudden just go, I don't know how it open cans anymore. I've tried. I don't know. I struggle with that. So just even opening a can can be a difficult challenge, and programming a DVR, definitely one of those as well. We have all sorts of phone calls, but I have a break that's coming up. So when we come back, those of you on the line, just stay with us. One of our callers wants to talk about some of the sense of entitlement. Is that an appropriate topic for the millennial generation? I don't want to talk about that.
Okay,
I'm just kidding.
I don't feel like it.
Yeah. Don't feel like it. I don't feel entitled to that. Some others want to talk about what's going to happen in the court system. So we've got quite a bit that's been started simply by bringing in some of the conversation here about parenting and about adulting and about older men discipling younger men, older women discipling younger women. I think that's in Titus too, right? So that's a good place to look for that. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some more phone calls, continue this conversation. A little bit later, we'll switch positions. We'll put Nick in this position. We'll talk about President Donald Trump.
Oh, boy.
Looking forward to that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Joel Rosenberg was on my radio program recently to talk about his new novel, The First Hostage. We didn't spend too much time talking about his book, but instead focused on the phenomenon of apocalyptic Islam. Let me explain what that is. There is both radical Islam as well as apocalyptic Islam. The vast majority of Muslims do not fit into either category. According to some reliable polls, only about 10% of the 1.6 billion Muslims subscribe to the concept of violent jihad. Millions and millions of Muslims may believe in Islamic eschatology and even believe that we're entering into the end time, but that doesn't mean that they believe in violence as a way to achieve it. Radical Muslim groups like Al-Qaeda, Hamas, the Taliban, and the Muslim Brotherhood may use violence against Jews and Christians. They want to push them off of Muslim lands. But they differ from apocalyptic Islam. Joel Rosenberg puts it this way: radical Islam seeks to attack us. Apocalyptic Islam seeks to annihilate us. Apocalyptic Muslim groups would include the leaders of ISIS, now called the Islamic State, and the top leaders in Iran. They're driven by Muslim prophecies that you can find in the Quran and the Hadith. They believe that the end of days is at hand, and they believe that their Islamic Messiah will come to establish an Islamic kingdom known as a caliphate. And they also believe that the Messiah will implement Sharia law throughout the globe and force everyone to submit to this caliphate. Joel Rosenberg has found that few world leaders understand these issues. Sadly, they do not understand the danger of apocalyptic genocidal Islam. We should pray that they understand this, because the future of America and the future of the Western world depends on it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. In select theaters one night only, Tuesday, May 23rd. Information at inourhands1967.com.
You're listening to Point of View. Your listener.
212. Nick Pitts, Aszia Pearson with us. Let's go to California this time. KYCC, and Rachel, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Love the show. So I just wanted to talk, about the elephant in the room, entitlement, that I feel like I've made the observation that a lot of the newer generations are feeling it's become part of our culture to be entitled. And then that ultimately leads to people enabling the entitlement scenario. And I just feel like we have really gotten away from accountability. And so I just wanted to hear your point on that. And also I wanted to discuss, funny you guys talked about the can opener, and then that goes back to the home ec, because I was served in the Army. I'm a veteran. And I see the value in being self-sufficient and being self-sustainable. And I'm trying to figure out how I can give back to my community, to women veterans, on teaching them how to be self-sustainable and homesteading and things like that. Because like knitting, my huge thing is canning and gardening and mending and things like that. If we can enable in a different aspect of our culture and these younger generations to be self-sufficient and self-reliant and self-sustaining, that is how our culture is going to grow and get back to our roots as a country and being able to not rely on the government for their needs. So I just wanted to thank you for the time.
Very good ideas there. Aszia, any thoughts, first of all?
Yes, so I do agree with you. There is definitely an air of entitlement in this generation. Something I've also noticed and been exposed to just through my relationships with great, wise mentors who are older than me is it is true in a unique way for millennials, just with the access we have to things like social media, where we can kind of expose ourselves in our own entitlement by our public complaints or our, we talked about #adulting, outing ourselves that, hey, we just learned to change a light bulb or whatever that may be. So I think we definitely see it more in full force. And I agree that there is less accountability. But as I've talked to people who are, like I said, older and wiser than me and have lived generations before, entitlement, honestly, is just characteristic of youth. And we've all got to grow out of it. And I remember my mom was 24 when she had me. So I remember her in her 20s. And the woman she is today is very different than the woman she was when she was 27, 28. And I was very young, but I still remember her learning some of those basic tasks as she's, taking care of this little 4-year-old girl and having to grow into a whole new level of self-sufficiency and independence. And so I think that's a key thing that I've been reminded of very sweetly, very kindly, and very compassionately from those who are older than me. Just, hey, honestly, I kind of was like that. I kind of was a little entitled when I was younger. And I do agree that that's taken on a new wave with our generation, just with the access that we have. But
I'm reminded of what Margaret Thatcher says. She says the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money.
Yes,
and I think work and entitlement there's a relationship between the two. And I think what we've continued to see specifically in this generation is there's less work because more and more millennials are working towards these altruistic efforts. But in reality, we wonder how altruistic they are because often they're just to go on a college application. I remember
to self-promote.
Yeah, I remember growing up, and I had to work at the Clarksville Montgomery County school system, and I had to mow grass. And by mow grass, I mean I was paired with an older gentleman, and I was he would get on the riding lawnmower and go, and he would give me the weed eater and say, "You see that hill? My mower can't go on that, so you just weed eat that entire hill." And so I remember every summer, it was from 7:30 in the morning to 3:30 every afternoon, so pulling 8-hour days. And that was work. That was hard work for me in the hot Tennessee sun and humidity. And what it did, though, is it instilled a work ethic inside of me that still is with me today.
Yeah,
it's eradicated a lot of that entitlement because I've recognized that I got to work for what I want. And I think the social science research would continue to indicate is that we have increasingly the number of children before the age of 18. That number is decreased that are actually working right now.
Yeah.
And so when your needs are when your needs are being provided for, then there's no need for work. And when there's no need for work, then there's the sense of entitlement that I'm entitled to all these things.
Yeah, we had all these laws against child endangerment and those kinds of things. And you've been the generation that had kids on board and, wore the helmets and all those kinds of things. And I think we've not necessarily done a good job of providing a good work ethic. As somebody that worked in a machine shop and has put shingles on roofs in the hot Texas sun and laid pipeline and things like that, you really quickly learn how to work, and you recognize how important it is to give a good day's work for a good day's pay.
And there's something very holy about going to bed and being tired. And I still have some of those blue jeans that literally have holes in my hip because I would just be weed eating back and forth, and the weed eater engine would just get a hole right in my jeans. So I think there's a goodness that comes from work. Now, granted, there's a badness, but there's a goodness as well.
Rachel, I was just thinking, you mentioned something else, to give back. I know that one of the things my wife did years ago, and this probably wouldn't work now because people wouldn't like the title, but she used to do something called Help for the Harried Homemaker. And it was to really help people in the church, especially women primarily, to learn things like organization and housekeeping and hospitality and the rest. But you could come up with some kind of program like that to help vets become self-sufficient, to help them learn some of the skills necessary to be successful in the 21st century. And I do believe that there would be people breaking down the doors to come and have somebody like you that could teach them some of these lost arts of canning and cooking and all sorts of things that you were been able to pass on to them. So I really want to encourage you to go out there and try to do that.
Thank you so much, Kerby. I appreciate it.
Well, let's, if we can, take at least one more phone call, and we'll go to Georgia this time. And Dorothy, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Mr. Kerby. I'm from Baxley, Georgia, and we listen to you bringing my son home from school every day. And I'm always intrigued to hear what you have to say next, because it is it's life changing. But I had called just to tell you, I'm sure you already know, but for the listeners, we talk about mentoring and we talk about discipling, and there's so much that can be done in a child's life. I advocate for children through CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates. And through our training just recently, they had some more statistics, and that big boom in my heart, the people were telling us that children, by the time they're in the third grade, if they're not reading and learning on that third grade level, that their chances of surviving and finishing school and becoming productive citizens is so diminished. Yeah. I came from a broken home. My mama was very strong. She worked. She kept us surrounded by good and positive people. But she didn't pay them. It was people that had hearts for children and that would lift us up and keep us encouraged. And I'm 53 years old, and I have a learning disability, which wasn't diagnosed or named until I was in the 9th grade. So I really didn't even finish my high school career. But through the CASA program, I can advocate for children, and I'm very involved in children and their educations in school, because I realize as an adult how important it is. So I'm just trying to encourage anybody that can hear me to not wait until you get to high school or college and start mentoring these children, because the children, young, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, when they come from homes that are abused and, people are missing mama, daddy, grandparents, whatever, their little minds are so torn. A lot of our children don't even know where they're going to spend the night they get off the school bus. Where am I supposed to go, and how am I supposed to have supper, and all these things that a lot of people aren't familiar with, because it doesn't, the church doesn't see that. But if we get outside the church and we just go to our local school and say, hey, I have an hour a month, can I just come and read for 30 minutes? When you start making relationships with these young children, it changes their lives. And they say, okay, I've got somebody pouring life into me, and I do matter. And it makes such a huge impact on the little ones. It takes so little time, when you don't have a lot of time, to impact their lives. And then it changes them forever.
Sure. Go out there and get involved. I unfortunately have to go to a break, but you've really challenged all of us to think about how we can give back and how we can volunteer. I know Aszia wants to talk about that, but I have one of those breaks coming up, so we will take a break, and we'll put Nick here in the host chair for a few minutes, give him a chance to guide the direction and the discussion. We'll take some more phone calls, and then we'll get back into some of the issues in the news. If you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things we've talked about today, it's all on the website, pointofview.net. Don't forget, we also have a link to pureHOPE.net, all of it available on our website, and we'll be back right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Wow, I was not expecting that intro in. This is Nick Pitts here, and we've got Kerby Anderson.
Dr. Nick Pitts.
We didn't want to have one with my name on it, so you're the guest host.
There it is.
So
I was not
go.
expecting that. I was like, whoa, I'm taken aback right now.
There you go.
Well, very neat, very neat. Well, I wanted to pick up with the conversation where we left off with Dorothy. Dorothy was talking about her work with CASA, being a volunteer for that, and I know, Aszia, that you had some experience with that, correct?
Yeah, so my husband actually volunteers with CASA, so I've gotten to see his engagement with foster care and advocacy, but I also was really resonating with a lot of what Dorothy was sharing because my personal story, I always make the joke that I'm the most adopted person I know. And what I mean by that is if you look at my story and how I have grown up and become a #adult, although I probably just undid every good thing I've ever said by putting a hashtag in front of that. The way that has happened is through a series of teachers. The first person I ever heard the gospel from was my second grade teacher, and she did that by volunteering for Sunday school with the exact same age she taught. She invited the students in her Sunday school class to invite the students in her school so that she wasn't violating any public school government policies there, and she's the first person I ever heard the gospel of Jesus Christ from. I had a high school teacher, same deal, very involved in the community. I had a family down the street who would cook Vietnamese egg rolls, and you can't say no to that. And so then if they're going to invite you to church, you're going to go with them to that too. And just a series of people who took the time to invest in these small little ways. And I think that's where we can all be encouraged that it seems too big a burden for any of us to bear individually, and it is. But those little points of advocacy, the Lord is the one who's going to stack those up to a lifetime of discipleship. And so I just kind of wanted to share a little bit of my story as encouragement that that's why I'm here, is just a series of people who invested in these small ways. Like the Kool-Aid house Kerby mentioned, having unlocked doors and food and hospitality and wisdom to abound. So.
I just graduated with my PhD, but you have to know the context of that, though, is that I almost failed kindergarten and I did fail my driver's test. And so the fact that I could graduate with that was a large testament to the Lord specializes in doing impossible things. Mm-hmm. But a part of that is I recognized that there were individuals that came in my life that really helped me along the way. And primarily a part of that was teachers. Mm-hmm. And so I've been in school for 23 years. And so 23 days leading up to graduation, I highlighted a teacher in my life, and I had a neat hashtag, teaching Nick was the Pitts. And so I highlighted every teacher because, again, I don't know whether all of them were believers, but I do know that teachers are just so significant in my life. Specifically, I was in public school most of the time, and just how pivotal of a role they played in my life. And then you speak to the orphan situation. Mm-hmm. I know here in Texas, I just gave a presentation, that there are 13,764 orphans here in the Texas area.
Wow.
But when you think about that, though, you think about how many churches are there. Mm-hmm. There are over 27,505 churches. So what would it look like if 1 out of every 2 churches took James 1:27 seriously to visit the widow and care for the orphan? We would eradicate the orphan problem here in Texas. And what would that look like countrywide, as well as the 153 million orphans worldwide? It's just something to think about right now.
I did that years ago, and of course I have to run the numbers again, but we were figuring out nationwide the number of people under poverty, and then recognize we have over 300,000 churches, and we said just if each church was responsible for a few individuals, of course it doesn't work out quite geographically, but you can see how, again, what seem to be monumental problems get resolved when you start recognizing what the body of Christ could do.
Oh, man, and we start to see, like, just, again, if the church was just the church, we could see the government begin to shrink. We could see some of these maladies and some of these plagues that are rippling out throughout our societies. Oh, just the opportunities and the potential. So, speaking of government, Kerby, I think there are a couple of things that are happening relative to the government, right?
What are we going to do with this? This has been a week. Can you keep track of all of it? You've been writing about this in the daily briefing, but obviously we have a couple of issues. Number one, of course, the president, whether or not he revealed any confidential information, and that's one of the articles we posted here, Loose Lip Sync Presidencies. And then we have the other one that says that he actually did something, according to the notes left by James Comey, to try to cut off an investigation. I don't think either of those are problems, but you would think that we are at least DEFCON 3, if not DEFCON 1, with the press, the way they've been reporting it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's so fascinating right now because it's almost like this battle of two personalities right now. You've got Donald Trump. Latest Gallup tracking poll has him at 38%, but then you've also got the media that their favorability and trust rating is at 32%. And so for context perspective, Jar Jar Binks of Star Wars infamy is at 29%, and Nickelback is at 39%. So nevertheless, it is not looking good right now. But what we see is that it is just this heightened sense of awareness right now of anything that President Trump could do wrong on one side, but then on the other side, there's just this disbelief in the sense that we can't trust the media on the other side. And somewhere in there's some truth to it. And so I was trying to think, Kerby, on the way in today, was there ever a time, could you think of like a historical president that it's been like the media has just been after a president as much as the media is going after Trump right now?
And that's why I was thinking this is perfect to our millennial discussion. We'll get more into some of the issues with Trump tomorrow. But the millennial situation is this. You've grown up in a time with a 24/7 kind of news cycle. I'm old enough to remember that before Ted Turner created cable news network, CNN, we had news, but it was kind of ebbing and flowing. Lots of people would get a newspaper. They would see what was in the newspaper. They would maybe watch the evening news, and there were only 3 major networks. And if Walter Cronkite said this is the way it is, that's the way it was. If a president made a mistake, the next day, the press secretary just routinely would say that was a mistake. But now when you all of a sudden have this intensity of a 24-hour-a-day news cycle, not just at CNN, but MSNBC and Fox News and everything else, anything that before might have been a blip on the radar screen, if you can use that as a metaphor, now turns into a major explosion on the radar screen, and as a result maybe has more credence and more attention directed to it than it really deserves.
Yeah, I continue to think we've developed an appetite and we want it, right? So like we've developed an appetite for Donald Trump to be able to tweet early in the morning right now. And when he didn't have any tweets this morning, I thought to myself,
is he okay?
Yeah. Is something the matter? What's going on right now? Yeah. Aszia?
Yeah, so the 24-hour news cycle, I would actually argue, is not new. When you look at, and I think every small town listener can attest to, if you grew up in a small town, you had a 24-hour news cycle. You knew what Betty Jo down the street was doing. True. You knew what was happening to everyone in your town. And if you look back throughout history, I know Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne's a great example of this. You've got the scaffold scenes as the core of the novel, but you've also, if you're not familiar with the novel, you've basically got this huge venue for punishment, and everyone in the town comes out to see this woman with her Scarlet A emblazoned on her chest, and everyone's coming to see the sin committed in their midst. And so I don't think that 24-hour news cycle is new. I think it's different. I think with globalization, we've become one giant small town, and all we want to hear is who can we slander next, who can we sensationalize next. And so we're just looking for places to watch who's being publicly punished now.
Yeah, I think back to some of the old presidencies, and if they were under as much scrutiny as our president is under right now, how will we look at them differently? I guess you could call me an expert on John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign specifically, but then I can't fathom the media attention on John F. Kennedy and some of his scruples when he was in the White House relative to some of his unfaithfulness that's been documented so much. I can't imagine what we would think of even Kennedy today had he been under the same media spotlight that Donald Trump's been.
And one of the things that I know Aszia wants to talk about is she'd been reading the book, The Right Stuff, right?
Yes.
And back then in that novel, which again, all of us, I think, around the table are going to read now that she's gotten so excited about that, is there were just a lot of things that weren't covered. And of course, one of those was the peccadillos, is a nice phrase for John F. Kennedy. You never saw a picture, for example, of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in a wheelchair. They never were counting the number of times Dwight Eisenhower went to the golf course. They're counting every single time that Donald Trump goes to it. There were times, no doubt, when Jimmy Carter and maybe even Ronald Reagan released something that might have been considered classified information, and yet that was not an issue. And that's, of course, been front page the last couple of days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it consistently flip-flops from generation to generation, whether or not we want to out these scandalous things that are happening in our lives and happening in our leaders' lives, or if we want to conceal them for the sake of, a moral standard or what have you. But Nick, as you were talking, I was thinking what I'm constantly reminded of when I look at media scrutiny. I think, oh gosh, what if someone saw into my life? What if someone was constantly unveiling the things that I was thinking or doing or emailing or saying? And I know we're heading to a break, but I think there's a personal element to this for all of us.
And we'll pick up that conversation right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. On the 2017 National Day of Prayer, President Trump took a remarkable step in support of religious liberty. President Trump assembled religious leaders from a variety of faith traditions in the Rose Garden of the White House. In addition to making remarks about the National Day of Prayer, the president signed an executive order strengthening religious liberty. The executive action prioritizes religious liberty within the Trump administration, encouraging the HHS secretary to consider rules alleviating the religious conscience of those impacted by Obamacare, while ordering the IRS to decline enforcement of the Johnson Amendment and directing the Attorney General to issue guidance to all executive agencies on the law governing religious liberty. This executive order is one of the ways in which the president is fulfilling his constitutional obligation to ensure that the laws passed by the legislature be faithfully executed. Moreover, the executive order reins in those administrative agencies that have, in recent years, often ignored the laws governing religious liberty. As my boss, Kelly Shackelford, said after the president signed the order, our country was founded on the promise that its government would respect the religious liberty of its people. America's commitment to freedom, and especially religious freedom, should be our national priority. Much work remains in defense of religious liberty, but with this order, the president has set his administration on good footing. To learn how First Liberty is protecting the religious liberty of all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Nick Pitts here with Point of View, and we've got Kerby Anderson and Aszia Pearson that are joining us for the last 9 minutes. And so we'll pick up the conversation where we were, right? You were talking about just over the break, over the idea of this personal privacy that we're kind of dealing with right now. Speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, so I think for me, I'm pretty simplistic in my political views. And so what sticks out to me more when I hear story after story and more scrutiny and more problems, I studied the book of Daniel with a group of girls last year. And when we got to Daniel 9 and we see him praying over his nation, he is calling out and addressing so much sin and wickedness. And I think that's something that we can look around our day to day and say the same thing. There is so much wickedness, there's, so much sin, but what he does so well is he says we, I, me, my people. He doesn't say they, them, he did, she did, which I think kind of the distrust of media, that's kind of a lot of what you're seeing is it's a he said, she said. It's kind of a big tattletale platform oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes. And so I think that that's where I'm always encouraged is just looking at some of these issues and then letting it be a reflection of my own heart and asking myself where are the places where I'm identifying with these same issues or subscribing to them or promoting them.
I think about the buzzword right now, Kerby, is this whole idea of normalizing behavior,
yes.
right? And so I think that's one of the things that I'm most concerned about right now is just because there's a sense that we are creating a new normal relative to the morality. And I think that's where I'm most disheartened right now. And what I want to try to at least do due diligence and due respect to history is that we don't normalize some of these behaviors either on the right or the left. This isn't just a President Trump issue. This is how is Chuck Schumer treating the office of the presidency? How are some of these media journalists treating Mr. Trump right now? Because from a biblical perspective, we know it to be true that give honor where honor is due.
And, one of the things that Francis Schaeffer used to say is that what one generation permits, the next generation practices to excess. For a long time, people have made fun of the presidency, so now you're really seeing people being very critical of the presidency. We said a while back, well, maybe at least the Democrats are saying it wasn't that big a deal that Hillary Clinton had classified information on a server that Russia got. So now they were saying, well, maybe it's okay because Donald Trump really didn't intend for any of that code word to get out. This is the problem because we've seen more and more a whole society that is willing to decriminalize all sorts of behavior, consider broken families to be normal, to consider a divorce, adultery to be normal. And you wonder what is going to happen when your generation is in positions of leadership, because over the next couple of years, you're going to see more and more members of Congress coming from the millennial generation. You're eventually going to have a millennial president. And if you have the so-called new normal as your morality, I really fear for the future of this country.
Yeah, I think that's increasingly important just for Christians to understand that we don't do well as party people. We're people that are champions of issues and just wanting to continue to champion issues and never become so blind to the I guess you would say the flaws of the party that we're willing to overlook that for the sake of power. I think that's one of the things that we're going to continually need to see.
Yeah, you were talking about normalization, and when I hear that word, the first thing I think of is the word holy, which literally means uncommon. So when these things are being normalized, our response ought to be, how can I be holy as he is holy in the midst of these things that are becoming increasingly normalized? And so I actually think it is good news for us as believers when some of these things are becoming more culturally normalized. It does give us an opportunity to stand out and to be different and to be uncommon and to be light amidst the darkness we're seeing.
Yeah, there is quite a bit of darkness right now, and so there's really an opportunity for the church to be the church in this midst, especially in the political forum as well. There's so many issues. I think about what First Liberty is doing right now to be able to champion religious liberty in this space, and then to be able not just champion religious liberty for Christians, but also for Muslims and for Buddhists and for others as well. I think that's so key.
Yeah, I might just mention, too, the last article there by Andrew McCarthy's been on the program here entitled Intelligence Lapses and Double Standards. It's one of the things that I think the millennial generation is saying, look, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. Matter of fact, I may not even be registered to vote. So, I can see double standards on both sides here, everybody that was so unconcerned about Hillary Clinton's email, for example, now all of a sudden is just got their knickers in a knot because of Donald Trump. Wait a minute, I think this is one thing that's been really good about your generation. You're saying, look, I'm not loyal to party. Matter of fact, I really don't like either of the parties, but I don't like these double standards that I see played out right now on the political arenas.
Yeah, I think our generation is keenly aware of hypocrisy simply because we've seen it. We are just so transparent.
You've seen it so often.
Yeah. And we've seen it in the business world relative to Enron. We've seen it in the church world relative to the Catholic Church abuse scandal. We've seen it in the family relative to the prevalence of divorce. We're just intimately acquainted with hypocrisy. And so when we see it in the political world, we just need to have the wherewithal and the bravery and the courage to be able to call it for what it is and to expect more, kind of circling back to our earlier conversation. You're going to treat the person's going to act the way that you treat them. We need to start treating our politicians, our public servants, to a standard that I believe would be applicable. especially for our Christian politicians, calling them to holiness, like you spoke to, Aszia.
Well, again, we'll get to some of those Christian politicians on in the next couple of weeks, but it does, again, illustrate just the need for us to find individuals that would actually serve, whether it's in business or in politics or wherever it might be, with integrity. And, of course, that brings me back to one of the favorite things, Nick, you like to point out. This is a generation that complained about the election, but most of them were not registered to vote. Most of them have a Facebook account. Very few of them actually have a voter ID.
Shocking twist. And so millennials, 90% of millennials have a Facebook account, but only 55% of them have actually registered to vote. And registering to vote is as easy as getting a Facebook account. When you actually think about them actually going to the polls and vote, 1/4 of them went to the polls. And so I wonder how many of those are actually protesting or actually voted. So
I think that harkens back a little bit to the conversation we were having in the first hour about the hashtag adulting. Adult is not a verb. That's one of those life skills, to steward a vote and to steward that responsibility. And that's one of those things that, you know, we say, oh, I want millennials to know how to do this. And when we see that key phrase, know how, it implies a need to be taught. And so I think that's something the show's doing an excellent job of. And, you know, in our spheres of influence, we're doing an excellent job of encouraging people, hey, this is important.
And speaking of, we're coming to the end of the show. And so what I wanted to do is teach us a little bit more. So if we want to find out more about Aszia, if we want to find out more about Pure Hope Ministries, where might we do that?
You would go to purehope.net. All of our resources are available there. All of our information, our staff, email addresses, everything like that is available right there.
That's great. That's great. And Nick, where would we go for Denison Forum? Yeah, you can go for the Denison Forum. You can go to denisonforum.org, DENISON forum.org, where you can sign up for the daily article, which is Jim Denison's daily essay of about 550 words that tackles one issue, or the daily briefing, which is around 9 to 14 articles per day that try to help us engage the cultural issue with the biblical truth. Kerby, what might you add, my friend?
All I'm going to add is tomorrow we're going to have in studio with us Greg Vaughn, and he's been doing things to really encourage dads, so it'll be kind of before Father's Day, and we'll probably do another program as well. So he'll be in, but we'll also get back into some of the news cycle. Then, of course, our Friday weekend edition will be Debbie Georgiadis with us, as well as some others that will be part of that conversation as well. So those will be some things that we're going to be covering. And let me just mention real quickly on the website, pointofview.net, that's where you can find the Denison Forum. That's where you can find Pure Hope. And those are some great opportunities for you to find out how to get involved with those ministries. And if you do so, hope you'll also click on that banner that says join the truth team. For as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, you can support this ministry, or you can give a one-time gift. And if you've appreciated this Millennial Round Table, I think this is here to stay. What do you think?
I feel good about that. I feel really good about that.
I think it's going to be here to stay. So we'll have that next week. You're going to Washington, D.C., and then to Italy, so it'll be a few weeks before we see you at the round table again.
Oh, yes, sir.
Well, that's all we have for today. I want to thank Andrew, Alisa, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow for our Thursday edition of Point of View.
From CBN Documentaries comes a new film, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem.
Our goal is clear: to wipe Israel off the map.
For 6 days in 1967, surrounded by enemies on all sides, Israel stood alone, fighting for survival. In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, in select theaters for a one-night event, Tuesday, May 23rd only. Theater and ticket information is available at InOurHands1967.com.
We go through seasons, getting our education, falling in love, marriage, children, challenges, success. Sometimes the checkbook is full, and sometimes it's not. And through all of that, Point of View is here, working for you, working with you to make a difference. Please consider whether this is the season for you to support Point of View, to join the Truth Team. Join today at pointofview.net/team or call for details 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Let's work together for good. pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.